Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. We just finished discussions in Nigeria about the National Population Commission, with which the census was postponed indefinitely in Nigeria. We do hope that subsequently the census will still hold this year. And now we switch gears to situations on the International Workers' Day, where across South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, and many countries around the globe, the International Workers' Day is celebrated today in recognition of the pivotal role workers play in building the economy and society. Celebrated in more than 80 countries, people in different parts of the world held marches to promote the rights of working class people and to promote them from exploitation. In South Africa, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, said it would continue to request Parliament to push for a higher minimum wage for workers.
While in Kenya, President William Ruto on Monday presided over his first Labour Day celebration in office at the Uhuru Gardens in Nairobi. The president urged leaders of the Azimio la Umoja opposition to let go of the 2022 general elections and focus on the future, while also pledging support in Kenya's growing sectors. On the other hand, the Opposition Citizens Coalition of Change CCC leader in Zimbabwe, Nelson Chamisa, used the opportunity to vow to improve workers' salaries once he assumes power, while also urging employers to pay workers fair wages. Now, join us for this very important Labour Day discussion. We have Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. She's the national spokesperson of the National Union of Metal Workers in South Africa. One welcome to you, Phakamile, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the show. The name is Phakamile. It's a hard P.
Thank you very much for that correction. Now, Phakamile,
it's okay.
How would you assess South Africa's government's commitment to improving workplace conditions and equity in the labour market as promised by the ruling African National Congress Party?
Well, I think our position on Workers' Day is that the gains that we have currently in South Africa are as a result of the struggles and the sacrifices that ordinary workers in South Africa went through, certainly during apartheid, and also to defeat apartheid to get to the point where we are today. Under apartheid, being a member of a trade union, if you were an African worker, was illegal. And there was no legal framework to protect certainly African labor. And what we have today, where we have a Labor Relations Act, which guides and protects the legislation and protects the rights of workers, where workers' human rights and the right to strike are enshrined in the Constitution, the fact that we have maternity leave and paternity leave, the fact that you can't just dismiss a worker because you feel like it. You have to follow particular processes. All of those things that we now benefit from every day in terms of our labor relations framework are because African workers in South Africa made huge sacrifices during the war against apartheid. So our complaint with the African National Congress, with the governing party, is that even after the fact that they were elected into power on a massive mandate where the majority of workers voted them in 1994, in the 29 years that they've been in power, they've not gone far enough in transforming the economy so that the majority of African people live an improved life. As I speak to you now, in South Africa, we have an unemployment rate that's higher than the Ukraine. And you know that the Ukraine is at war. We are the most unequal society in the world. That's how we're measured in terms of the UN and all other institutions, because that is how far back we are in terms of our developmental agenda. We've not done enough to make sure that the majority of people who happen to be Black and who suffered under the apartheid experience what democracy and the so-called fruits of democracy are supposed to bring, which is better education, better healthcare, and an overall improved quality of life.
Okay, looking at these issues that you have raised, Phakamile, I mean, is it the fault of the African National Congress why we still have this issues coming up in South Africa? And what efforts have labor unions made in promoting and protecting the rights and interests of all workers? Because I know that in South Africa we have several labor unions.
Well, yes, I think this is a lesson not just for South Africa, but for the global working class. I was listening with interest to the interview that you had with the minister regarding the census in Nigeria. Nigerians are going through similar struggles that Black workers in this country are going through, where you supposedly exist in a framework called democracy, but this democracy has not translated into freedoms that enable you to feel like you are free. As long as you are sitting at home and you're jobless, and by the way, Nigeria's got a very high unemployment rate, extremely high poverty rates. As long as those are the conditions where the majority of people are suffering under that type of framework, then you're not free. And so why we say that the ANC needed to do more is the ANC was given power to change the South African society through the elections. Instead of doing that, what they did was to implement neoliberalism and reinforce the power of capital and reinforce the power of business and basically uphold the status quo. So where under apartheid, the white elite minority were the ones who owned the economy. In South Africa, that remains true even today, where when you look at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, according to the Triple BEE Commission's own reports, there is not a single Black-owned company, I'm talking about 100% Black-owned company that exists on the stock exchange. And yet we have a Black government in power and we want to claim that we've achieved something. How could we not actually be represented on the stock exchange? It means that in terms of your government policy, you've not gone far enough to affirm the rights of Black people so that there's greater numbers of Black people in ownership and management, where you actually have transformation of the economy, where the means of production, where banks, where factories, where mines are owned by Black people. You've not done any of those things or not gone far enough. So that is what we're saying. We're saying that the ANC government is not genuinely committed to this kind of radical transformation that needs to happen if we're going to be serious about tackling inequality and poverty in South Africa.
Now, talking about tackling inequality and poverty and also unemployment, Phakamile, you did talk about the issue of unemployment earlier when you made your opening statement. And now South Africa's unemployment rate remains high, particularly amongst the youth. What has been done and what can be done by the government to improve on this? And also, as we speak to you right now, I know there's load shedding where you are in Gauteng. How much has it affected employers and businesses? And the issue of unemployment, youth unemployment, is it just the government that can solve it? How can the private sector come in to also help improve the situation?
Well, you know, first of all, the issue of load shedding is crucial. I mean, as I speak to you, I'm sitting in the dark because the lights obviously have gone off as part of the load shedding schedule. And how we got here is because the ANC government, instead of looking at the needs of the majority of people, the fact that the mandate of this country needed to be that our state-owned entities must be used to benefit the majority of people, they allowed institutions like the IMF and the World Bank to dictate to them about what should happen. And those institutions have said we must privatize. So our state-owned entities right now are undergoing privatization. And that process has resulted in, has created a situation where electricity now is so expensive because you've got the private sector that's also involved in energy generation, and those costs are passed through to the consumer. That's the first thing. But secondly, the issue of load shedding exists because the ANC government stopped investing in the coal-powered fire stations. They stopped doing proper maintenance. Now these power stations are collapsing and we can't guarantee regular energy. And at the same time, they're prematurely closing down power stations so that, again, the private sector can get involved in generating energy through the renewable energy independent power producers. That program is not working because, unfortunately, the painful lesson we're learning is that you cannot power an economy only on renewable energy. It must be backed up by coal or nuclear. This is something the rest of the world is learning. I mean, Germany reopened its mothballed power stations because they would not tolerate a situation where their population was sitting in the dark, even though they're driving a renewable energy campaign. But the South African government here chose instead to listen to banks instead of listening to the people. And now we don't have enough power. We've connected more than 6,000 megawatts of these IPPs, but frankly, they're not helping us to keep the lights on. And the government stopped spending money on maintaining coal stations. So these are some of the things where we say the South African government, the ANC, has sabotaged the South African economy by taking senseless decisions to benefit the private sector. And those decisions have actually backfired. So the fact that we can't guarantee energy means that companies are closing down. We're losing lots of jobs through retrenchments. Because, I mean, what kind of business can survive when for 12 hours or 6 hours every day, you don't have electricity? That is the crisis that we're facing today.
All right, now, Phakamile, still on these issues and the crisis going on in South Africa. I mean, you are the spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. So what are some of the challenges that your union, your workers, the metal workers are facing in South Africa?
Certainly, load shedding is the biggest challenge. Plus, you spoke earlier about youth. Oh, youth unemployment is terrible in our country. As I said, we've got 37% unemployment, but when you look at the expanded definition, which means those who've given up looking for work, we've got 43% unemployment, and the majority of that is young people. And you must know that if young people are sitting at home not working, that's a ticking time bomb. That is the perfect condition for unrest, for social unrest, for violence, for criminality, which, by the way, South Africa also has very high levels of. And then at the same time, what would help us greatly is if the government would use the state-owned entities to create jobs instead of privatizing them. To give you an example, I think I even had a conversation with you guys about South African Airways and how it was, it went through a restructuring process. More than 3,000 workers lost their jobs because the government decided that they wanted to stop funding it and allow a private equity player to play a more direct role. Now, the SAA of before the restructuring was an SAA that created 24,000 jobs along the value chain. Now it doesn't even come close to that. It's a shadow of itself now because it operates on about less than 1,000 employees. So it's not doing what it did, which was not just to provide direct jobs, but to actually create a value chain around aviation. Because of SAA's existence, we had affordable domestic flights for small and medium-sized businesses. And of course, I don't have to argue, we don't have to have a debate about this. We know that that's good for business. And now suddenly it is so expensive to fly domestically because you no longer have a mango whose prices were deliberately kept low in order to ensure that average people were able to fly within South Africa in order for them to do business. We've had massive closures of hotels and hospitality companies, all of them that were connected to the existence of SAA. What we can expect to happen is the same will happen at Eskom if this government proceeds fully with its privatization plans. Because already they're closing down power stations, again, listening to institutions like the World Bank that say SAA is overstaffed, but not caring about replacing those jobs, Yeah. And so if you're in a country where you've got almost half the population that is unemployed, the worst thing you can do is to close down entities that are actually helping you to create jobs. And we feel that those are some of the ways that this government is failing young people, where it has the power, utilizing institutions, state institutions that it owns. It can actually do more to create jobs, But because it's pandering to elite financial institutions that benefit 1% of the globe, we're all suffering.
Now, Phakamile, before we wrap up this conversation, I recall I had an interview with the founding president of COSATU, J. Naidu, who was in that government of Madiba. And I asked him if Madiba were to be alive today, would he be happy with the way things are run in South Africa? And his answer was a definite no. South Africa just celebrated Freedom Day a few days ago. There's elections next year. South Africa is a democracy. Looking at the options and what the ANC has done, do you think the solutions to all of South Africa's problems might come from looking at an alternative to the African National Congress, or will the African National Congress clean up its acts and respond to the yearnings and aspirations of ordinary South Africans?
We long ago gave up on hoping that the ANC could change its path. We were, as NUMSA, involved and supportive of the ANC during the dark days of apartheid, during the liberation struggle. We were part of the alliance. And then since 2013, we made a break and decided that we would never and no longer support the ANC, because it had become very clear to us that up until that point, it had done everything possible to advance the interests of the wealthy elite against the interests of the working class, in terms of its macroeconomic policy direction, in terms of decisions that it was taking, the fact that the poor were getting poorer, the fact that the majority of Black people in South Africa still live in informal settlements, the same informal settlements that existed under apartheid. We still have children drowning in pit latrines, you know. So because of those, the failure to fundamentally transform the lives of people, we started agitating that members should stop supporting the ANC. And we, by the way, NUMSA was very involved in campaigning for the ANC in the past. We used to mobilize in communities as the largest trade union to ensure that our members and their families vote ANC. But in 2013, our members told us that they no longer wanted to support this ANC government, which kept betraying them. And not only did we promote and adopt that resolution, we went further. We even took steps to establish an alternative political formation called the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party. And the goal of that was to really cement workers' demands through a political formation whose entire ideology would be focused on improving the lives of the majority of people. Because we recognize that it's not good enough to think that you can reform capitalism. Capitalism cannot be reformed. It exists off the exploitation of the majority of people by a minority. So what we need is a different system, a system that's rooted in benefiting the majority. And this is the agenda that we've been driving and the message that we've been promoting to our members since then.
Quite instructive coming on a day like this as the world celebrates International Workers' Day. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, National Spokesperson, National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, for joining us on the conversation on this very special day. Thank you so much for your insights and your contribution.
Thank you. And of course, to all the workers out there, once again, a happy International Workers' Day. We do hope for higher minimum wage. I mean, all across board, we've seen complaints about that. And we also hope for a better working condition for all workers.
I was going to ask you, though, we should go out for Workers' Day celebrations, but we're still working.
We're still working.
It's the work we do. Yeah.
All right, then. So that's all for today. Join us again on Wednesday for another edition of The Conversation. I am Marita Omodia.
And I'm Benga Bora. Thanks for being a part of the program. Bye-bye.